All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rough Report. I am Jimmy Ruffian. We're doing a bit of a late one because I'm having this debate discussion with this person who is anonymous. I'm having a bit of faith in, I guess, Twitter kind, in a manner of speaking, that I am going to dive into this discussion with an anonymous person and hope that they act in good faith. And yeah, so that's what we're doing here today. We're going to connect via Discord, I believe. So if you're here in the chat, let me know. Love to hear from you. I can see what you're saying in the multi-stream here. So whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, which we simultaneously broadcast to, yeah, feel free to be part of the discussion there. So I guess what the nature of the conversation is going to be is, you know, just kind of our overall beliefs. This particular individual describes themselves as a neoliberal. But ostensibly a neoliberal with much more, perhaps, you know, ideas that perhaps might be sympathetic to socialistic or welfare systems. So maybe we might have a little bit more in common than we realize. I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. So we'll see how that's going to go. That's supposed to start in about the next 15 minutes or so. But first, I'm going to talk about a few other things. Let's get the music, the intro music out here. So yeah, what I wanted to start with, and like, I know I always say this is not something I want to make a particular focus of the show, but for the past few episodes I have. And that's, you know, kind of like the sort of online Twitter, YouTube sort of drama and battle between leftist thinkers. It's unfortunately, like, as much as it's a thing, I don't, it's like I want to think that it's not particularly of a whole lot of value, but there comes a point where you sort of got to admit that it has a bit of value in that it shapes how people in large numbers look and think about political ideas. And there seems to be this, like as of recent, a large rift amongst the left where you have what I believe to be bad faith actors that are ultimately acting against progress on a leftist front, advertising themselves as leftists, and namely this is in your kind of like Jimmy Dore Bad Faith podcast, quite aptly named, if you ask me. You know, and I think, you know, I don't know, like I consider it bad faith acting. It's sometimes hard to know if they come from a genuine place. I get a feeling that a lot of it is a grift, or maybe they forget themselves or something like that. I guess I'm a little more on the, you know, Majority Report, TYT kind of sympathetic end of this spectrum, as you might see in the next segment in the video I'm about to show you. I first and foremost, what I'm about to show you, I'm not overly familiar with this podcast, I will admit. This is The Vanguard, a leftist podcast, and I would probably say that in a lot of occasions I would agree with these guys, and in a certain extent I do agree with these guys. But what I want to talk about in terms of like the online discourse and how we handle these things, and how I believe it's ultimately unproductive and anti-progress, is in essentially how they talk about it. Here, you'll see what I mean here. So as they describe it, reacting to Anna Kasparian's disgusting anti-homeless rant on the Young Turks. Now, I would describe this like I say, I generally like Anna Kasparian, and I think she operates from, generally speaking, a good place with reasonably good intentions. That's not to say that every take she has is super excellent, because I agree that this one is not. It is certainly not excellent. I wouldn't say it's in effect. In its impact and how the general public would receive a message like this, it is essentially anti-homeless. But I don't believe that's ultimately the place she's coming from. So when we look at discourse like this and handle it, I think there's a better way to do it. Observe.
Unearthed it, Diane Bullock. So shout out to her. But yeah, this clip was recently, unearthed, but it is from a recent episode of TYT. It's not like this is from 10 years ago or something. But yeah, let's take a look at this and react.
I do think that there are progressives, I don't know if it's progressive policy, but progressives in places like California who have made terrible decisions. And so one of those terrible decisions is essentially doing away with anti-camping laws, right? Allowing people to camp out wherever they want, whenever they want. And if, like, we have a homeless problem in California, we have it all throughout the country, but it's particularly bad in California. And so the argument is, well, if there isn't public housing available for people, they should be allowed to camp out. Okay, but there's also a problem right now where there is public housing available and individuals will say, no, I don't want to take it. I don't want to follow the rules in the public housing. And so as a result, I would rather camp out. Progressive lawmakers are like, we should allow them to camp out. And you know what happens? Crime happens. Open air drug markets happen, and it's the truth. These are the facts of the matter. In fact, it was addressed in this Daily Beast article.
Nope.
And honestly, it was cathartic to read it because everyone denies that this is happening. I do think that there are progressive.
To have my fucking opinions validated on neoliberal media. That makes me feel so good. Homeless people.
They're not wrong in that immediate reaction. Where Anna Kasparian is coming from there is it's a general misunderstanding of how broken these social systems are. And I think we should, rather than how they talk about it, which I will show a little bit more of, I would sooner argue that the point of discussion around this should be how broken the social systems are that make barriers. Like, it's not just as simple as like they're offering them a place to be, right? It's and they're just saying no. I'd rather live in a tent in a public park. That is, it's just not as simple as that. So here, I'll show you a little bit more of what they're saying, and we'll go from there.
People are only homeless because they want to be homeless. RJ and Gavin, didn't you know?
Yeah, someone pointed out in the comments, it sounds like she's a Caitlyn Jenner supporter.
See, like that initial reaction there, I think that's a little bit of a stretch, what she was saying. It's a little bit uncharitable. Again, like it's certainly worthy of criticism. And I don't think they're completely in the wrong here. But I think it's a little bit uncharitable to put in the context of homeless people just want to be homeless. I think we know that even Anna Kasparian knows better than that, right?
Yeah, I just can't fucking believe this shit, man. And RJ, I'll let you get your reaction in.
Yeah, so to me, I just feel bad for the audience that they have to pay for this cringe-ass shit on their members-only show, which is, to me, it's just terrible to do this to your own base, just to get it out of the way. But, like, this idea that homeless people would turn down an opportunity for housing simply because they just want to live on the street, I mean, that's false. And also, too, like, what she's saying in this clip is, like, the most right-wing, crazy bullshit. And, like, how could she even call herself a progressive? By being this
that's the thing. It's not necessarily right-wing crazy bullshit. It's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how these systems are broken. So to try and frame it that and this is where I think it's unproductive in that they spend a particular amount of time talking about this. And furthermore, like this particular podcast, I noticed in, you know, their videos and stuff like that, and kind of observing some of their other stuff, is that they're very much on that Jimmy Dore side of things, that I think fundamentally is anti-progress and is, you know, as much as they have a lot of the right ideas, I think in practice, it fundamentally is divisive and unproductive to the ultimate leftist goal. And I think the way they're talking about this now is a bit of an example of that. And it might sound a little bit like kind of like rhetorical and nitpicky, but again, it's the amount of time and energy you spend on these things, and they seem to take a particular amount on that, in that they want to frame this as, oh, this is right-wing stuff, this is Fox News stuff, this is pushing a certain agenda that is antithetical to the left. And I think, like, if we observe, you know, I've been watching TYT for a while. I have observed how Michael Brooks, and before his passing, and how he interacted with Anna Kasparian, and how he, like, successfully turned her left, and all that and his approach and stuff like that, which I, you know, have talked about on the show before, is I think it's like fundamentally a better way to go. I think his approach to these things was very productive, and I think we saw that as an example in him turning Anna Kasparian further to the left. So yeah, we got Ping Test in the chat here. Hatred towards the homeless is a very centrist, snobby, elitist position. It certainly is. And I think what we get confused there is when people say things like, oh, you allow them to live in these encampments and crime happens and drug happens. And it's like, yeah, on its face, in a certain, you know, like in the capacity and the structure in which we live and how we treat the homeless presently, yes, that is what happens. But again, that comes from an ignorance of how an ignorance and understanding, and I think a sort of lack of education in how, you know, there's like a disconnect there in how we understand and know how these systems work. It's very easy for a very, I think, left-minded person or somebody who would be otherwise very sympathetic to the homeless to be able to think these things and easily be able to slip into that idea where it's like, oh, well, I read that they're telling them that they can have a place to live and they're just saying no. I like, why would they do that? You know, and then framing it in this sort of conversation where it's like, you're just right wing, or you're just a shit lib, or, you know, you're fundamentally acting with bad intentions here. I just don't think that's true. And I like, and that's not to say that the reaction is completely bad. I get it. Like, I think there's, you know, I don't disagree with the fundamental point of what they're saying, and that she is wrong for saying those things. And then, like, you know, and that's, I should mention that even just today, she came out in heavy support of Cori Bush in, oh, shoot, okay, I gotta check in on this thing. Just give me a call whenever you're ready. Okay, I'm gonna call the guy in a second here. So hopefully this works. I've never tried to, like, do a video chat on Discord through Streamlabs before, so hopefully we don't run into any technical difficulties there. Oh, so I totally got off my point there. So I might as well just call this guy. It's 10 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock his time. That's when we said we were going to do this. So let's do this thing. Nat, if you're watching, she's in the living room right now. I could use a glass of water. I don't want to get up and walk away from the show right now. So I need producers and assistants and stuff. Doing this whole thing yourself sucks. I'm going to... see, I'm already getting the scratchy voice. Okay, here we go. Wait. Oh, I should do. Okay, I got to turn on the camera. All right. I'm gonna maybe turn off the video. And put this to full screen. Am I doing, like, I don't even know if I'm doing this right. I am not a Discord user. Okay. Is there something I'm doing wrong here? All right. Wait a second here. Bear with me, folks. Thank you for tuning in, by the way. I see I have a few live viewers. Oh, okay. You can hear me right now. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on with my camera. I can't hear you, though. Yeah, I can't hear you right now. Maybe there's something going on with that. Here, join video call. Hello, are you there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me right now? Hello, hello. Damn it. I can't I can't hear you. Okay, what's going on with this? How do I get into settings? Is there settings for this thing? Okay. All right, I totally can't hear you. Wait a second. Show chat. Yeah, I have my output device. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. You know what? Okay. Settings. You can tell I am super used to doing this. Server boost connections. Voice and video. There we go.
Testing.
Oh, there we go. Oh, okay.
Oh, cool.
All right. I got it. Yay! I am not completely technologically inept here. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, how do I get back to my other screen? Oh, escape. That would do it. All right. Welcome to the show. I'm not sure what your real name is. If you want to give that, you can go ahead. Maybe give yourself a bit of an introduction here.
Yeah. My name's Fisher. That's pronounced Fisher, but with an S. I don't know what else to say. I'm just a random dude on Twitter. Basically.
Okay, so well, yeah, and basically what came to be is we kind of started a debate, and I am just like extremely adverse to. All I had on me was my phone at the time, and I'm extremely adverse to debating with my thumbs. I just like really hate that. So I much prefer to do it in this format, and I found like a little bit of what you started to say there was potentially a little bit interesting. So describe to me what you would say is your sort of political position. What like how do you see a idealistic political situation, I guess?
Yeah. So I guess like to use a standard label, most people would refer to me as a social democrat. I'm a fan of markets. I think markets generally tend to work pretty well, but like if they're left unregulated, they can end up being disastrous. So I think that like the ideal system for me would be something like a capitalist system that has like heavy government interventions and that is like guided towards, I guess, the common good.
So like, but given that you would describe yourself as a neoliberal.
Yeah, so specifically in online communities, I would consider myself a neoliberal because a lot of online neoliberal communities tend to be much further left than, I guess, real-world neoliberal politicians. So, like, I think the biggest community that serves as an example of this would be the neoliberal subreddit, where it's very center-left, very almost SOCDEM adjacent here. And then also to a certain extent, certain neoliberal communities that I found on Twitter.
Okay. So like, do you, given that, do you find that sort of like, do you find yourself questioning at all why they would identify as neoliberal given that definition? Like in the establishment of what neoliberalism is, I can't even talk. In like about 1947, that this sort of project started under the idea that you would have a further lack of government regulation in favor of freeing up the markets. Why do you believe it is, particularly in these neoliberal communities online, that they differ from that? And do they have a conflict with that?
Sure, I think that generally they do have a bit of a conflict there, because for most of the communities that I've seen, their sort of purpose is to just change the definition of the word, right?
Okay.
And so I also would like to push back a little bit on the idea that neoliberalism has always just been deregulationary, because I believe that neoliberalism was actually derived from the initial concept was ordoliberalism that started off in Germany. And the idea there was sort of counter to the classical liberal ideology of just total free market laissez-faire. You would have like the government intervene in order to solve like market failures and stuff like that. And that was sort of like the initial stages of neoliberalism. Compared to like the Roosevelt-esque social democracy, though, they were very deregulationary, right?
Okay. Yeah. So, is that like sort of akin to like, as you would see it, like a Keynesian sort of approach, like austerity, like only in sort of crisis sort of idea?
Yeah. So the common neoliberalism ideology that I partake in is sort of like very built off of Keynesian economics.
Okay.
And then there are a couple of like post-Keynesian elements that arise as well in some of these communities, although they're not like a massive part of it.
Yeah. So like, because generally I think like when we see the neoliberal project playing out in the larger politic and like how we see sort of global politics going, but particularly more so in, United States, here in Canada, UK, that sort of thing, we're very much seeing it in a reliance on privatization. right? And like giving it further into the open markets. And this, we've seen evidence of this in the, how it's played out in terms of the gap between, the rich and the poor, and the 1% and the 99%. And, we can see like the economic fallout of these extremely neoliberal ideas on a broad scale. So do you think these particular online communities, as they call themselves neoliberals, stand in defiance to that?
Yeah, to a certain extent. So most of the ones that I'm familiar with are very anti-Reagan, right? Very much against like the idea of trickle-down economics, especially. Sort of like cracking down. They support like cracking down and making sure that like people are paying their taxes, and ensuring that sort of like the economy is directed towards the betterment of the common good, right? So you'd be like very hard pressed to find like big Reagan stands in most of these communities.
Where do you think the Reagan stands live then, if not in the neoliberal communities? Where are they?
From my experience on Reddit and stuff like that, usually in like libertarian or classical liberal communities. Really? Yeah.
Okay, so like you would very much like say you're opposed to libertarianism.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who used to be a libertarian and then like slowly started realizing like the massive flaws within just letting markets do whatever the hell they want. I think that like libertarianism is just a terrible ideology.
Yeah, okay, I would definitely be in agreement with that. Zero argument from me on that one. So like, yeah, it's just interesting to me that like that why not just say that you're liberals then? Because it just, like, to me it sounds like that's what you're really going for, is like just sort of redefining neoliberalism as just what we knew it to always be, sort of thing.
Yeah, so like from my understanding, liberalism's a relatively broad, like overarching category. So
yeah.
Like you've got classical liberals, you've got certain Republicans who would be considered liberals, just like standard conservatives who could also be considered liberals. So like I think the point was specifically to sort of like get the subset, which was neoliberalism, out of this sort of like hyper deregulationary, almost libertarian-esque ideology towards being a bit more practical, I guess.
Okay.
And a bit more evidence-based.
Okay, so given that, where do you feel you like stand opposed to like socialism as you understand it? Where is the line there where you're like, okay, this level of regulation is where it hits the threshold for me?
Sure. This would very much depend on what flavor of socialism you're talking about. Right. So if you're talking about like standard tankies and stuff like that, I mean, I think that we would both agree here that like generally that can get a bit too far, very anti-democratic. Oftentimes, I'm very much opposed to like hyper-centralized economies and economic planning, because it seems as though most of the time, whenever countries try to engage in economic planning, they cannot efficiently allocate resources. This is an economics concept called the calculation problem.
Yeah.
Not sure if you've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, fairly familiar. Yeah. I'm not an economist, but
Yeah. So it seems as though virtually every centrally planned economy that has risen over the past couple of centuries has ended up encountering the calculation problem and been significantly less efficient at determining where resources should go for the production of goods and services, as opposed to market economies. If you're talking about market socialism, I feel like that's sort of like the brand of socialism that would be most practical. Because like it has that reliance on markets, so it doesn't have nearly as big of an issue with the calculation problem.
Okay, I guess given the calculation problem, like in terms of like ultimately the calculation problem being, I guess to put it in a very simplistic sort of format, just fundamentally, like as you say, deciding and allocating where certain resources can go versus the number that you can yield versus the number that you have, before you just like run out of it and can't allocate it according to your plan.
It's like maximizing productive efficiency.
Exactly.
From the resources you have. Yeah.
So given that, like, where do you think policy perhaps hits a threshold before you reach that problem?
So it seems as though just like a reliance on competition within markets is what determines like whether or not people hit that threshold, right?
Yeah.
I would be hard pressed to find like an exact amount of competition that should be required in an economy. But it seems as though economies that essentially give monopoly power to the state end up having like a massive, because like that's the foundation of the ECB, right? Is just that monopoly power in general is inefficient, and that when you have more actors within the economy, that's when efficiency is I guess there to a greater extent, right? Because the more, this is why like this is sort of like to the Austrian hyper idealized society of like just like small businesses operating everything, right?
Right.
That kind of society would be the society that is least susceptible to the calculation problem.
Okay.
Now, obviously, I think there are some issues with that, but I can get into those if you want.
Well, like the thing that gets me about the calculation problem fundamentally, in that like, you know, it's inefficient in terms of like distributing resources. What about the inefficiency that we already see here today? Like in our society, overproduction is a massive untalked about problem, mainly because in the private sector, when you have these multiple amounts of actors in you know, what you might call a diverse economy, producing grandiose numbers of goods in order to meet a calculated demand, which they often doesn't happen because, say, you know, as an easy example, flat screen TVs get, you know, thrown in compactors by the thousands because, you know, companies like Walmart overcalculate how many they need, but given the profit and the volume that they're still selling them at, you know, the shareholders aren't really going to notice or care. It's a calculable expense that is still ultimately yielding a profit. And given that you're overproducing, now destroying a great number of product and still being able to profit, that sounds extremely inefficient to me.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. So I think the primary reason why we have such inefficiency in our economy, at least in America today, is because we do still suffer the effect of, not strictly speaking monopoly power, but something very similar to it, right? You have these massive mega corporations that have very large amounts of market share, that don't have to be nearly, they don't have to prioritize efficiency nearly as much in order to make a profit, right? Ideally, I would like to see a lot of these corporations sort of downsized. I think that's one of the reasons why like things like antitrust are absolutely necessary. And then on top of that, I think that the reason a lot of these corporations have gotten is because they is also largely due to government subsidies and whatnot, right? So I tend to attribute like problems of overproduction just to the fact that these corporations just have massive amounts of market share.
Yeah, that's generally probably like a good takeaway from that. I would be in agreement on the antitrust idea of breaking up these companies, but part of what makes that volume affordable to a massive economy in terms of consuming goods in sort of a private sector format that can still continue to generate profit in this sort of like diverse economy where everything's broken up. Where like what point does it get where like, you know, you're sort of doing the anti-liberal thing in that there's no longer a profit incentive?
Elaborate on that a little bit for me.
Okay,
like way I see it, if you were to break these companies down and just like make them smaller companies, those smaller companies would still have an incentive to make profit, right?
Well, the reason that capitalism has gotten to the point that it has in how we consume the things that we do, and how power has been concentrated, and how it's been able to maintain itself despite its obvious flaws for as long as it has, is in the fact that they are able to produce at this extremely massive capability, to the point that destroying otherwise good things becomes the more somehow economically efficient choice. So when you start breaking that down in terms of how much those goods are going to now cost behind a diverse economy where you don't have a concentration of ownership, and how much those goods are going to cost versus how much you can pay the people to work at these various businesses, it starts to break down further and further, where the difference between owner and worker is shrunk to a great extent. And to me, that, in my socialist position, I would describe that as a fairly good thing. But at what point does that become sort of objectionable to you, I guess?
I don't think there's really a point where it becomes super objectionable to me. I think the primary thing is just the primary thing here would just be when it becomes impractical, right? So that's one of my issues with
what's impractical though? What becomes impractical to you?
So I think that reducing the distance between the worker and the owner, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that when you transfer total ownership to all workers and you get rid of investors, I think that's when it becomes an issue, right? Because one of the big things, this is one of the issues that I just can't seem to think through market socialism with. If market socialism could solve this issue, then I would probably be in favor of some sort of implementation of it. Would just be the establishment of new businesses without outside investment, right? Because the main reason why people make investments is to get some sort of return. That return has to come from the company's profits, right?
Right. So you mean solving the problem in terms of being able to say what, the government to be able to provide a loan to start a business? Would that fill the gap?
See, my issue with that is that you're essentially going back to central planning there, right? Because the government would be a single central body that would essentially have to determine which business ventures are worth funding and which business ventures aren't worth funding. The reason why a modern capital market is a good idea is because you've got millions of actors determining where capital is flowing, and these actors are likely going to be far more capable of determining which I guess.
Well, for example, in Ontario right now, where I live, this is a fairly consistent statistic as far as I've seen in most places, but given a small fluctuation in numbers, is the 70% of all new businesses in this province fail within their first 3 years, which means that is investment lost, that is resources lost, that is renovation, construction, tons of sort of economic activity that happens there that ultimately doesn't yield a profitable outcome for any of the parties involved. And so when that happens 70% of the time, given how open and sort of neoliberal Ontario presently is, I call into question how efficient that sounds.
Sure. So there are obviously going to be unprofitable ventures, right? But I would push back on the idea that all of the economic activity that's come to establish those businesses is lost. Because at the end of the day, if you have, let's say that you have a store that's constructed for a small business or something like that, and that business ends up going out of operation, that store is probably just going to go into the hands of some other business, right?
For
And so that
the
capital
most part,
doesn't just disappear.
but in a large extent it does, because now you're going to have that business vacant for an extended period of time. Some level of renovation is going to have to take place, even if it's like a restaurant replacing itself with a new restaurant. Chances are they're going to just renovate that again. Sure. And so it's like, yeah, you could say like economic stimulus came from the fact that, like construction companies and contractors and stuff like that, had a job and made a bit of money. But that's really no different than if the government were to regulate that as well.
How wouldn't it be different from if the government?
Well, like in terms of like if we're talking about like these people are being paid a reasonably good wage because they're tradesmen and unionized and things like that. There wouldn't be really any economic difference on that front, and then you'd have a business that would perhaps, given intelligent regulation, a bit more longevity, a bit more of a chance to stay afloat, and not maybe purely depend on investor dollars, where you have to depend on a upper class to be able to provide that. Right, because because now you're closing the market off, like to kind of breaking into a bit of a tangent there, but now you're closing the market off to tons of people who could be successful in it because they don't have access to those investor dollars. They don't have those sort of connections to be able to do that. Right. And so you have to start off already on a certain economic level to even be able to have access to that. So you're already cutting off like a slew of the market there. So between or potential labor market. So between that and then, the number of businesses that close down and the number of turnover that happens in there, and having to basically repeat the same economic actions over and over again, it's just like, that might be good for sort of like, quick economic stimulus for those companies involved. But for the most part, people are just losing, right?
Sure. So I'm going to have to go through this a little bit point by point. So when you say that unionization and labor regulations would essentially, are you basically saying that unionization and labor regulations would essentially create the same effect as if the government were to determine where funding is
no,
going?
I'm just assuming that whether you have a system where the government is investing in businesses as opposed to private, I would assume in both those situations that the workers are unionized and just being paid well.
Sure. Yeah. But like the issue isn't with like the practices of the company itself, right? It would be more so which of these business ventures should we support, right? That's the issue with having the government determine this stuff, is like how would the government effectively predict or how would the government effectively determine where the demand is without the existence of some sort of capital market? Because like that's generally how we measure the value of
they could do it in the same way, in mostly the same way the private market does. They can measure where the demand is, where people are ordering these products, where they're asking for them, and essentially fulfill that demand. That wouldn't be much different than how, say, like Amazon is doing it right now. They're such a massive corporation that, say, if you were to nationalize them, you're essentially making like a giant, that's like 60% on the way to like full socialism, kind of, to flip a company like Amazon, right? So yeah, like given that, like their efficiency at allocating resources, because they are such a monopoly.
Sure. So
how is that different?
The issue I would say with Amazon is that they're not particularly efficient at internal planning, I guess. So like the reason why a monopolistic corporation and a centrally planned economy are not what's the word I'm looking for? Analogous, is that when it comes to a private corporation, all they're trying to do is create efficiency when it comes to external transactions, right? However, with a centrally planned economy, you're trying to create efficiency when it comes to internal transactions.
What do you mean by external and internal interactions there?
So basically, when you're talking about like a private corporation, they're responding to price signals that exist outside of the corporation, right? So like pricing schemes of competitors, where like capital is being allocated on financial markets and stuff like that. And so they use that to determine how many, I guess, resources they should get from an outside actor, so another corporation, and how many goods they, or sorry, the price that they should set their goods at when it comes to selling to like citizens, right?
Right.
So those are transactions that are happening outside. Those are exchanges that are happening outside of the corporation, right? This would be somewhat akin to a central economy looking at the general prices of imports and then using those to determine or to set the prices of their exports, right? So like things that flow into and out of the country that could be a useful system. But the issue is when it comes to a centrally planned economy, you're trying to determine exchanges of goods within the system, right? So like how many apples should trade for like a pile of wool or something like that. So when it comes to a scheme like that, it becomes much more difficult. That's one of the reasons why these monopolistic corporations end up being very inefficient, right? A lot of the times you see overproduction because they haven't got a proper system of determining like internal exchanges there.
So given that, you would say that perhaps a diverse economy like that isn't necessarily that efficient.
Yeah, if a lot of the market share in the economy is just going to a few actors within the economy, then yeah, it wouldn't be efficient, right?
Okay. So here, sorry, my partner's right here. She's trying to ask me something.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, what was that?
Can I just add something into the...
Yeah. Okay. Nat wants to ask a question.
Hi. So I'm just going to add something briefly into the conversation that I don't hear a lot addressed. And so if you two just want to like chew on that and stuff. Oh, thank you. Just the way that a lot of markets imagine cost efficiency doesn't take into account the way that they're undervaluing environmental degradation and the effects on their workforce. So I think that if we're talking about nationalizing something, that we need to take into conversation the way that reimagining how we invest and what we find value in investment can't just be based upon strict dollars and cents. It can't just be based upon like you have put in $20,000 and this year you've extracted $40,000 worth of income from the economy. I think that it needs to, we need to expand the conversation into, what have you added to the economy? Like if you have a business that, I'm not going to talk about Amazon, I'm going to say like a small business, like let's say I'm going to just throw out like a t-shirt printing business or something like that. Let's say that you're not making hand over fist in revenue, but you have a product that is consistently valued by the community to the point where you can keep a roof over your head and you can offer a living wage to your employees. How do we change so that the government or private enterprise can value that and not just compare it against something like Amazon that extracts mass value from labor to the detriment to the economic impact of their workers. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. This is why we're partners, because you beat me to the punch on that. That was actually going to be my a future point was getting into the idea of the value of labor and its impacts on the greater round of society outside of immediate economic measurements. So she asked a good question there. Go at it.
So I just want to make sure that I can rephrase the question here because there was a couple of things there. So one of the things that I heard mentioned was taking into account potential harms that production could have upon either the environment or the community, right? And then what exactly do you mean by taking into account the value of labor there?
Taking into account the value of labor in that, like, you know, there's a human cost to this production, right? And the idea that, you know, the profit incentive and how we currently know it and how inefficient we know these companies can be and just simply be able to operationally get away with it, because on both impacts, if we're still talking about the flat screen TVs, the per value of the TV being produced by that worker, and then the environmental impact of it is essentially like, you know, sort of doubled with each one that's destroyed, right? So it's it becomes like kind of like grotesquely inefficient when you take into account the human cost and the like, you know, part of the reason that they're not being paid to their full potential is their this sort of profit incentive creating the idea that they should be paid less in order to cover the cost of those things.
Sure. Yeah, so generally, I don't really attribute like value statements to like what should correlate with how much money somebody is making, right?
Right.
I think that there are generally, I think that when it comes to labor specifically, there are certain base conditions that must be met for all workers to ensure that they can live comfortably. And I think the best way to address something like that in a capitalist economy would be something along the lines of a minimum wage, or if you want to get sort of like away from the current discourse, just heavy amounts of welfare, specifically in the form of, have you heard of the concept of a negative income tax?
Negative income tax, where like basically it's if you don't yield a certain amount to get you above the poverty line, you're just going to be subsidized that amount essentially. Yeah. So it's like a UBI.
But only for the poor, right?
Yeah.
So you're maximizing.
What do you mean UBI only for the poor? Like how does that differ from how UBI, how most people would understand it?
Well, generally a UBI is like a universal basic income, right? So that means that it goes to everybody. When we're talking about a negative income tax, it's specifically for people below a certain income level, right? So the idea is that you would be maximizing the marginal utility of every one of those dollars, because you don't have money going towards people who already have a lot of money. You're specifically directing that towards people who don't, right?
Right. So you believe that essentially people should be able to work while being paid by certain companies less than what the poverty line might dictate, under the idea that the government is going to subsidize the rest.
Yeah, because my general idea is just to make sure that at the end of the day they're living comfortably, right? I don't care if that if the income necessary for them to live comfortably comes from corporations or from the government, so long as they're above that threshold, right?
Right. So but like
you could just have like a higher minimum wage.
Basically just like setting a higher minimum wage, or having like, you know, maybe even like a Nordic model where you have everything is sort of syndicated and unionized in the sense of like they determine what the wages are going to be through collective bargaining.
I think that like making sure that there's at least a minimum unionization rate for all employees within a company would be based as fuck.
Yeah. I just think like everything that you're saying is pretty like just antithetical to what neoliberalism really is. I almost say this to like, you know, not disparage you in any way. I see it as a positive in that it's like these neoliberal communities have just been sort of taken over by people who are perhaps a little bit more pragmatic.
Yeah.
And
I think that's generally what's happened, right?
Yeah.
We tend to follow the evidence on we tend to focus on following the evidence on economic policies and seeing like what kinds of economic policies have led to the best impacts, and those are generally the ones that we support.
Yeah, and like I think like where we mainly differ here is like the idea that having a more like democratic workplace is somehow detrimental to the worker. Like, do you like how? I guess, like in a very to put it in a very simplistic way, how does it get to a point where the worker who's producing those goods and producing that value not getting their full value of it beneficial to the economy? Why is it beneficial to the economy when we could just as soon divide that profit more evenly amongst the people that produce it?
Sure. So, like, I guess my primary issue with just like total democratization of the workplace, again, would just be like determining how to start new businesses, right? Like that's my primary issue with market socialism in general.
But like already people take out loans essentially that are there's a lot of government subsidies and government loans that can go out to businesses. Do you not believe that expanding on that idea and giving a greater amount of people greater access to those funds could potentially yield those greater economic outcomes that you would see as beneficial in a diverse economy?
I mean, it's possible if you're talking about just like the government loaning out money to anybody who wants to start a business. That's theoretically, I think that could have some beneficial effects, but the issue is, first of all, the cost of subsidizing all of those different business ideas. The government would either have to massively ramp up taxes or start printing massive amounts of money.
What's wrong with massively ramping up taxes? Like, say, put a 90% marginal tax on anybody above $10 million. What would be?
I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think the primary thing right now is that even right now, with the taxes that we have in place right now, taxation only funds like a very small amount of our federal programs. Like most of the time when we create federal programs, we're just printing dollars and like using those dollars to create whatever we want to create.
Well, that's what we do every time we give well, at least I'm actually not entirely familiar with so much how it works in the States, but here in Canada, essentially anytime you go to the bank and take out a loan, new money is created. The bank isn't actually loaning you money that belongs to the bank. They are given license by the government to create that money out of thin air, essentially.
Yeah, the difference there is that a bank essentially has more of an incentive a bank is generally going to be a little bit more careful with where that money is going, right? They're going to be a lot more selective. They're going to be looking at things like credit history. They're going to be looking at your venture and how profitable that venture is, and all of that stuff. Unless you're talking about something like purchasing a car or buying a house, right? It tends to vary a little bit there. But like specifically talking about investment banks.
Yeah, like, well, that's not necessarily like an investment though, right? Like that's that's them like more or less they're going to get their money no matter what, and they're not really like losing out on anything by creating it.
That's what an investment is, right? Like you put in a certain amount of money.
But they're not giving any of their property. Like, well, perhaps we're having a different conversation because again, like the banking system in Canada is a lot more already regulated than it is in the United States in a way that I see as positive as compared to the United States. But sorry, you had another question. Make it quick.
Sorry, it's gonna be super quick. I'm just like watching the other room.
You should just be part of the call.
I know, but it's my day off. So just one quick question, and specifically relates to you're concerned about if we provide small business loans to like every sort of Tom, Dick, and Harry who has any kind of crackpot idea. How does that differ from your universal base of income or ununiversal? I can't remember the exact term that you used.
Well, it's negative tax.
Negative tax. Sorry, I don't understand how you differentiate between a negative tax and funding potentially unprofitable businesses.
Sure. So when I talk about a negative income tax is primarily for just like commodities to be bought and sold, right?
Yeah.
So like you would use a negative income tax to purchase like food and stuff like that. If you wanted to use it to fund like a better investment venture or a better business venture or something like that, you could. But the idea is that you're not specifically selecting like certain businesses that will end up being funded.
Well, then, like, say if a certain person in, say, a more socialistic system wanted to start a business and have that government investment, or maybe even some sort of hybrid investment, why not have a system in place that would just simply educate them and provide them with the ability to obtain those qualifications?
Sure. So the issue isn't necessarily just with like education, although I would support like increasing education in order to make sure that people have like better investment ventures in the future. The other issue would also just be like how profitable the ventures themselves are, right? Because that is usually what we would use as a determinant for how they would be able to meet demand, right? If there's high demand for these ventures, then we would provide funding for them, because our idea is that if we provide enough funding and they start sating
but
that
the thing
demand,
is,
we'll
for millions of people stratified in various ways throughout society, they are going to absolutely slip through the cracks of systems like that. When you're talking about like broad strokes in that sort of way, there is tons of examples in our society that is essentially a net loss, but out of the greater good. Like here in Canada, you know, we have universal health care, and it works for the greater good. It is essentially costs the government money, but it allows people to live a greater quality of life on the day-to-day. The United States Postal Service delivers mail to areas that are extremely remote under the idea that everybody has a right to access to that mail, right? But so going under it under the idea that, okay, what is going to be the greatest way to extract profit from this, and how is that going to be most efficient, as we've discussed, through loss of, you know, access to being properly compensated by labor, loss of access of resources through overproduction and wastefulness of those resources in ways that there's no public scrutiny over because it's out of the public hands, and all these various ways. It seems that that sort of system is a net negative on society, and I would argue that in the ways in the real world that we've experienced and seen more of a central planning idea, it's been either extremely primitive or a kind of out of place or lacking nuance in the various factors that have interrupted it, like such as in the case of like South America, you know, we have imperialism and American coups and, you know, things like that. So to create a basis of comparison between the two systems, to say, well, this one on paper has been more successful. Well, of course it has. You know, it's been hegemonic, and everybody's sort of like out of that greed incentive, and the people that turn the gears of the world, so to speak, have all gone after that. But so the idea of, you know, as Nat just mentioned here in the chat, determining profit equals what's beneficial to the community and what's beneficial to people as a whole. There is a fundamental disconnect there that capitalism just simply cannot provide. So I think there is very much a potential in how you say the flaw in market socialism, and I would push market socialism a little bit further to the left, but in terms of the sake of pragmatic progress, I would take it. You know, I think it does solve that problem in the sense of you can have people being funded by the government and being funded to have democratic or public invested businesses that are ultimately good for the community.
Yeah, so to address this point by point again, so your initial claim of there being like certain, or of capitalism and just profit markets in general, not being able to meet everybody and having people fall through the cracks, that's the main reason why I'm against like a totally free market system, right? I think that those edge cases are the instances where government intervention is necessary.
But I think edge cases is maybe a way of underpinning it. Like it's, I wouldn't say like there are huge wedges, you know, like we're not talking about like hairs and fissures. We're talking about like, you know, it's so much more greater and detrimental to than that.
Like healthcare, for example, is
so
like a massive issue in the United States.
I think like when you get to the point when you're actually like addressing the concern to the greatest degree that it needs to be addressed in the way that you're talking about, like fulfilling people's needs, whether it be through a negative income tax, UBI, or helping them fund democratic businesses. To kind of throw out a quick example of that, Jeremy Corbyn had the idea that if a business wanted to sell itself rather than a private entity, the workers would collectively have a right to buy it, given a government loan. I think that would be an excellent step away from, you know, a more capitalist dependent system and kind of pave the way for that sort of democracy. Like it's I think to properly address all the concerns that you're saying within the free market, it gets to the point where you have to run into that wall and go, well, the free market is the problem here. That's the wall. You know, we're running up to a point where we can't provide for people in a justifiable way and in an ethical way and still have, you know, millionaires and billionaires existing.
Yeah, that's why like I would support government sort of circumventing the free market, right?
Yeah.
So generally, my stance on government intervention is that it should be very supplementative, right? If there are services that the market can't provide, I think that it's the government's obligation to start providing them, and also to sort of like notify them.
And then what do you, like, given that, what do you do to the government? How should the government be structured in order to implement that efficiently?
What do you mean by how should the government be structured?
Well, like
the way I would see it, I'm just like going off of the current government structure.
Yeah. But like, what can they do to fill that gap, even in a more idealistic way? Like, say if like there was like some magical government in right now that could like just do whatever they wanted to fix all the problems that you're citing. Like, what would that even look like? You know?
Yeah, so like I think the best example that I can think of here would be healthcare in the United States, right? I think that like a really good way of government going about solving that issue is just creating some sort of public option. That way you have that way you would achieve universality in healthcare by ensuring that lower income individuals have a government option that they can turn to that isn't going to be nearly as expensive as private healthcare companies, right?
So what you're creating there though is a stratification in that people who have less money fundamentally should have less care. That's what happens as the fallout of that.
Not necessarily though, because like in my ideal system, like the public option would be competitive in terms of like the features that it provides with private health insurance companies, right? So it would ideally cover more conditions than private insurance companies in order to
then why would people have private insurance? Why would they want that in that case?
That's the thing, right? The reason that I would want that is to create competition with private insurance companies so that private insurance companies are incentivized to reduce their premiums, find ways to reduce their premiums, and also to include
but if you're talking about a government entity running healthcare and running it to such an extent that there isn't a profit incentive, that they're willing to lose money on it because it's something that's being invested in through public dollars. How is any private entity supposed to be able to compete with that?
Yeah, so my idea would just be to make it a for-profit company that would have like significantly greater loss margins that is subsidized by the state, right? So basically, like, it operates at a loss for a decent amount of time, and it basically, the government basically continues to provide funding for it until market conditions are such that the private market is able to provide cheaper care. I don't think that it would be beneficial for this to. I don't think that it would be beneficial for a public option to basically just be like completely uncompetable, right? Because then private companies just wouldn't be able to feasibly exist. The idea would
what would be the problem with that?
I think that generally just leaving it in the hands completely of the government would have the same effects of monopoly power that we've been talking about, right?
But not here in Canada.
I'm not entirely sure how the Canadian system works, actually. Do you guys just like not have to pay anything for any of your treatments?
Yeah, like if I broke my arm and had to go to the hospital right now, I would pay $0.
Sure. So how exactly are you guys meeting the expenses for the treatment there? Like who is paying for that?
It's a federally mandated system that is controlled by each province, essentially our equivalent to states. Basically the Ontario healthcare system pays for it, and it's paid. Okay. And basically, they are a monopoly insurer. Technically speaking, like there's hospitals and doctors and practices that are private, essentially, like those doctors own them and run them or what have you. Sure. But all the insurance that pays for those services is done through the government. Okay. Yeah. And that is a system that has worked quite well. There's certainly things I think that can be improved in it, as anybody would argue, but the main problems that we run into it is when we elect conservative governments and they just cut the hell out of the services. That's when we run into trouble there. But overall, having it certain services that are connected to a basic standard of living and human rights is overall not only beneficial to society from a human happiness perspective, as we can see in the Nordic model and things like that, but in terms of it's profitable as well, in that people are healthier and happier and willing to go out and do more things and be part of society and be part of the economy. If you home the homeless, they have a tendency to provide more to society. If you provide services to addicts, they have a tendency to provide more to society, right?
Yeah,
so
that's why I'm in favor of have you heard of the concept of trickle-up economics?
I haven't heard it described like that, but I have a pretty good idea given what you just said.
Yeah. Basically, it's just like instead of giving stimulus to people that have lots of money, you focus on the people who aren't capable of engaging with the economy right now. And as you do so, you essentially, because they become actors within the economy, they stimulate demand, and they basically just stimulate economic growth, right? I'm very much in favor of something like that. And you bring up the Nordic model. I think that the Nordic system would be the ideal capitalist system, right? Because they still have very free markets. They rank pretty high on the Economic Freedom Index. Right. But at the same time, they have lots of government-sponsored services that are used to sort of fill the gaps that the market can't fill. And then on top of that, they've also got incredibly high unionization rates. So there's far more negotiating
Well, it's government mandated that they have those unionization rates. Anyway, here, Nat has one more question, and then I'm going to have to cut it off from there because I've already gone an hour and I need to get out of here. But go.
Sorry, I just want to fill in some of the gaps for you because you're American. So I just want to explain some things. Like, for example, dental care. Like, I got braces right now. That is from private private.
Yeah,
sorry.
that's not covered.
Sorry,
We don't
I'm
got
just
dental.
I'm just realizing that like on the little pictures for the YouTube video, it's like me covering my breast. Anyway, so dental care, orthodontic care, that's all private. That's no longer part of Ontario. And so I just want to explain to you, like, just to give you like a fuller picture of the difference and stuff, so you have a better picture as to what you're comparing against, because I understand as American, like the Canadian system can seem rather opaque sometimes. So I am paying like 50-50 orthodontic stuff between my private employer and my orthodontist. For dental, it's only because I have work benefits that we get our dental mostly covered. For most of Ontario, unless you are on specific programs like ODSP, which is our Ontario Disability Benefits Program, you don't have any kind of dental covered, and so they're considered our luxury bones. And same kind of thing with vision care. Like if you need glasses, a lot of that relies upon like Ontario benefits or being under a certain age or over a certain age to get access to those things. And I'm not saying that these are the preferred way. I'm saying that these are basically the results of various progressive conservative governments that have actually eroded our public benefits to make us believe that these are luxury services to be able to vision care and dental care, and the fact that if you go to the hospital and you break your arm, they'll fix it, but you'll have to pay, for example, maybe crutches, or not your arm, like if you break your leg, you might need to pay to rent a wheelchair, for example, because I don't think that James has ever broken his leg, but my ex-partner has. So I just want to like give a little bit more context. And so there's like a lot of peripherals, like we unless you have good work benefits, then you're paying 100% for pharmacare, unless again you're under like ODSP. So there's a lot of holes in the care, but these are holes that definitely could be filled given the will of a properly socialist government. And so because as I understand, with the U.S., you sort of pay into certain levels of private care for all of these. Am I right?
Yeah. Basically, it's just like private care comes in tiers. You can pay like higher premiums for more coverage, for like varying levels of coverage, basically.
Okay. So we have something almost akin to that in Ontario. It's just not nearly to the level in the United States. So let's say that I have, something like a sprained wrist, or, like a... I need to go in for an MRI. I need to go in for a CAT scan. I need, all these certain things. All of those are covered. There's just because of conservative governments that are offloading, we do have some peripherals that are paid for. So I just want to like clarify, just to give you like a fuller picture, right? Because like I don't think it's a fair conversation if we're painting Canada as this utopia where we cover everything, because we used to and we should.
Yeah, there's still a lot that ain't covered. Yeah.
So I needed to add that because I couldn't let him send you away with the impression that like all this was covered, because it's not. It should be.
Actually, England's system is a little bit more comprehensive than Canada's is. I think they get prescription coverage. They just pay like a dispensing fee, and they don't have to pay for their drugs at all. For the most part, like your average benefits in Canada in the workplace is like you get like 60 to 80% dental coverage, maybe a few $100s in vision care, stuff like that. But there's still a lot of holes in that system. But mainly, like the long and short of it is for certain services that we would associate with human rights and bettering our communities and having people engage in the economy, having those at the very bottom floor as completely socialistic systems removed from the private sector, I think has been shown to be pretty beneficial to society overall.
That's something that would need to do a little bit more research into. This is one of the things, like, when it comes to healthcare specifically, I'm sort of torn between like public option and I'm sure you've heard of like Medicare for all.
Yeah.
The system proposed by Sanders.
From what I understand, Medicare for all is akin to pretty much what I've described in Ontario. Is that you have essentially the government paying the insurance, right?
Yeah. They would take over coverage for, like, they would completely take over insurance coverage.
Yeah.
Basically.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I guess when I think about Medicare for all, the only thing that that makes me sort of oppose it would just be why would we subsidize care for people who would very easily be able to afford it in a private market, right? People like
well, then you just tax them proportionately, which is unfortunately something that as if you elect conservative governments, you don't get that benefit. So like right now we have a very conservative guy who's kind of sympathetic to Trumpian ideas. Doug Ford, he's running our province right now. He's cut a bunch from the healthcare system and, kind of gone that way with things, but when it's good, it's good. The main problem you run into there is like having it not enshrined as a human right, and then when you can elect a different government that can just meddle in it and say, I want to cut taxes for my rich buddies, and and at the expense of healthcare and education, which is like pretty much the conservative play for anybody here in Canada. So I guess that sort of like wraps it up. Like I said, I at the beginning of this, I had a pretty good idea that we would see eye to eye on a few things, and I think overall it's been a pretty enlightening conversation, and hopefully educational to the people listening.
Yeah, it's been educational to me too. I'm gonna have to do a little bit more research into the Canada healthcare system, but it seems pretty fucking based.
I highly encourage it, because like I can tell you, as a Canadian, we get exposed to a lot of American media, even more than Canadian media in a lot of ways, and I can see the absolute propaganda and lies that are espoused about socialistic healthcare. Like, I'm watching some of the stuff that these American talking heads say, and it's like, it's just not true. I live here. I know. So
I hear so much shit about like the Canadian system being like terrible when it comes to like scheduling surgeries and stuff like that.
It's not what I can tell you. It's just not what they say it is.
Like it seems like people try and portray it as like terrible, but it seems, well, any sort of socialized healthcare system seems like a massive step up from what we have here. I
absolutely
despise the healthcare system here in the United States.
We certainly agree on that, and I hope you guys get a chance to experience not having to pay hospital bills and talk to insurance companies on the phone very soon. It's pretty great. So thank you so much for joining me. Sorry, what was your first name again? I've forgotten since the hour and a half ago we started talking.
My name is Sisher.
Fisher.
Sisher. Sishir.
Oh, Sisher. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sisher, aka Socialist Demon Rat. I think it is. Is that what it is?
The social demon rat.
The social demon rat. Okay. Yeah. Well, I will see you again on the interwebs pretty soon, and thanks very much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation. Thanks.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. All right. Yeah. That was pretty good. I guess I'm just going to close that. Thank you so much for everybody that joined in. Thank you to Sisher for calling in. I hope to be able to do stuff like that more often, where especially people who can be potentially sympathetic to more socialistic ideas. Like, there were things I certainly felt like I could have been more aggressive about or poked at a little bit more in certain ways. But more what I was interested in there was just sort of hearing how someone who describes himself politically the way that he does, looks at these certain issues. I feel like we lack a lot of opportunities to just be able to kind of engage on that level, and especially in a lot of your more online sort of spaces, we have a tendency to just want to be adversarial and get the dunk and win something, which I don't think is necessarily the most beneficial thing. I don't know, Ping Test. I don't want to say if there was a definitive winner here. I don't think that's for me to decide. That's got to be for you guys to decide. I just feel I felt pretty good about the conversation all around. That's what I'll have to say about that. There were certain things that I think to be self-critical, I could have probably dug into a little bit more. But again, for the basis of this particular conversation, I wanted to be a little bit more on just the sort of receptive listening end. And Nat's accidental cleavage may have been the ultimate star of the show, but yeah, again, here, let me get Antifa Duck back, our friend, ladies and gentlemen, the leader of Antifa, this duck right here. Don't forget to check out my new track on Spotify. Look for The Rough Go on Spotify. I have 3 tracks up there now, all written, recorded, produced, 100% done by your lonesome, yours truly. I'm pretty proud of the work that I did there. So check that out. Especially if you like sort of, I'll just call it rock music. I'm terrible at describing my own shit. So just go listen to it, okay? The Rough Go. Check it out. So again, thank you so much to Sisher, and I hope to have many phone conversations in the future. Maybe Ping Test, you there on Twitch. I'm guessing you're the guy that I was talking to on Twitter before. Sorry, I forgot your Twitter handle already. But anyway, thank you for tuning in.